criminal sentencing decisions, which I'm sure we all think will be a really exciting debate. Could I ask the debaters to do us a favour, and for the benefit of the judges, could you write in your speaking orders in the chat? So could you indicate who's speaking first, second, and third? And then could you also indicate to us who is doing the reply speech, please? Ideally, if these names could be as close as possible to the ones that are on the TabbyCat software, that would be really useful for us for when we fill in the ballots. Whilst you do that, I guess the judges can introduce themselves. I am Robbie. I'm a debate coach from Scotland. I'm here as an independent adjudicator. Would our other judges like to introduce themselves while the debaters put their orders in the chat?
Hi, I'm Sharmila. I'm on the panel. Very excited to be here. I am originally from the Philippines.
Hi, I'm Kripa. I'm originally from the US, but I'm judging with Team Armenia.
Hi, I'm a trainee. My name's Christopher. I'm also really happy to be here. I have a lot to learn, I think, and I'm from Latvia.
Hello. Oh, fabulous. Excellent. Okay. In that case, if we are all ready to start the debate, I will invite the first proposition speaker to open the case for their side whenever you are ready.
Honorable panel, thousands of people around the world suffer from imperfect human judgment, which sentences them to unjust punishments. Three things in my speech. I'm going to bring you the model that we support in proposition and two substantive arguments. So firstly, towards our model, we bring you 4 points here. Firstly, by algorithms, we would understand artificial intelligence systems. That is to say, those that use and utilize neural networks and self-reinforced learning. Secondly, we would limit their capabilities only to sentencing and not to determining the guilt of a convict, only the length and the facility where the punishment would be served. Thirdly, we would support the conception of one unified algorithm, which would only have specific modifications per specific areas of law, meaning that different areas with different law systems would have the same algorithm, however, with modifications to fit those systems. We would further like to limit this motion to those areas which are under the rule of liberal democracy with independent judiciary. Last thing under the model, I would like to point out how we would create and maintain the system. We would create an oversight body which would be independent and formed of experts in the areas of law, meaning professional lawyers, professional judges, professors of law themselves, but also related areas like the heads of prison control boards, psychologists, sociologists, and informational technology experts. This panel would be intersectionally diverse and representative of various minority groups in the society. The system itself, before it would be set and given any actual responsibility, would be subjected to due testing and rigorous testing, and would be periodically updated as new laws come into being. Now then, we believe this sets up a fair debate, and I can move on to the first argument, where I talk to you about how algorithms can comparatively make better sentencing decisions than humans. And I'm firstly going to give you 3 structural reasons for why humans face barriers to delivering the right sentences. It is firstly the halo effect, because we believe that oftentimes judges form an idea and a conception of a convict before he even has a chance to properly, rationally defend himself. Things such as appearance, his voice, how he presents himself, how he walks, what he is bearing, all of those things affect the level of trust that the judge will have in this individual convict. We believe then that this is only one of the many examples of subconscious biases which can interfere with rational thinking of judges. I believe that this is extremely We believe that this is an example of just one of the many subconscious biases that interfere with the rational decision-making of human judges. We tell you that this is extremely problematic because it is not just to receive less time in prison because you have a nice smile. We believe that because AI does not care for looks, it is better able, no thank you, to make these rational decisions. Secondly, second factor, it is the physiological functions that AI can bypass. We bring you the example of a study of 1,100 parole hearings in Israel, which found that literally the only determining factor whether a convict will receive a parole or not was the time that has elapsed since the judge has had his last lunch break. We tell you that that was because of sugar levels in his blood. We tell you that this is an example of the many biological influences which have control over our rational thinking. Others could be the attention spans that are different with every one of us. It could be the diets that we eat or the alcohol that we all drink in different levels. We tell you that it is more than abhorrent that sugar levels literally determine the fate of a father estranged from his daughter and the time before he can hold her in his arms again. We believe that because AI does not need to eat, sleep, and crucially because it doesn't have a body, it can bypass these harms. A third reason I would posit are the biases against the already most vulnerable minorities. And here we bring you the study conducted by United States Sentencing Commission, which has found that Black people in America receive on average 19.1% longer sentences than their white counterparts for the exact same crimes, even after controlling for criminal history and other similar factors. We would explain this by the very undiverse demography of the judge population. Most of them are white and old, and they use their fear, malice, and ignorance and political convictions, and they let that interfere with their decisions. But even if it was not in these direct instances and in these direct factors, I would posit that there are also subconscious harms. But before that, I'll take the POI.
Why is it entirely necessary then to replace human judgment altogether, but let's just like replace the racist judges with someone who is more fair and more objective?
Okay, we tell you, and I've literally just given you like structural reasons why there are harms in every single one of them. And now I'm going to show to you why even those who are not directly racist are influenced by racist rhetoric. And that is because of the so-called availability bias. Because media disproportionately covers cases of crimes committed by minority groups, even if I am a judge that is not openly racist, when I have a member of a minority group in my courtroom, I will automatically associate him with a plethora and diverse, disproportionate amount of cases that I have heard about that this minority group has committed, on the cases that they have committed, that I will tend to give them larger sentences. Therefore, we tell you that colorblind judge is a myth. It is only AI that takes no consideration for race, which is why we support it. Now, having dealt with the harms of humans, let me show you the exclusive benefits of AI. And here we tell you that it is for mostly the enormous processing power that it has. It can literally read tens of thousands of past cases from all around the world and cross-reference that with statistics on criminal trends, such as reoffend rates. We tell you that this is a significant impact on the society, because if AI can learn from itself and find these unique patterns, it can then find, for example, relationships between reoffense rate of armed robbers and the length of their sentence, and thus make the whole system function a lot better, make rehabilitation smoother because it can pick the exact right length of sentence. We tell you that those are decisions which are in line with public safety and benefit, and which judges are simply not able to conceive because it is impossible that they would have read and hold at the same time hundreds of thousands of cases in their head. Now, the second argument that I'm going to propose to you is the scrutiny over justice system. And here we tell you that because we have the unique ability to test these machines, we are able to subjugate them to long periods of trials under intense oversight. Thus, thousands of real and hypothetical cases are then fed into this data, their responses are scrutinized, and we can correct possible imperfections. Notice how comparatively we have a lot more control over what device sentences and hands out sentences than we have over individual judges. Moreover, we would posit that this AI can respond to evolution in the development of law a lot faster. We give you the example of when homosexuality was decriminalized in Britain in 1967. What happened then that for the next 30 years, judges were still handing out larger sentences and harsher sentences because they found loopholes in the system because they could not stop the harmful momentum of their conservative beliefs because they carried with them the ingrained patterns that they had in their heads. We challenge proposition not only to engage with the enormous benefits of AI, but also the enormously flawed status quo.
Thank you very much for that excellent speech. And I will ask the first opposition speaker to open the case for their side whenever they are ready.
On side of opposition, we find it incredibly unethical to put people's liberty and reputation in the hands of something that not only literally doesn't have hands, but is also calculating how big of a risk you are to the society based on some arbitrary data. I'm so happy to be on side of opposition. Before I go on the crucial problems they have in their case, firstly, a few things about their model. I think the side of proposition conveniently ignored the fact that they have not conveniently didn't analyze enough how exactly will these algorithms be more objective, because many algorithms used right now in the judiciary systems have been highly criticized for being very biased. For example, Compass in US, which is 2 times more likely to falsely accuse an African American to be a high risk to society. Why is that so? Because yes, algorithms may not use race as a factor for its decisions, but they use proxies for race. For example, history of family arrest, your gang affiliation, your own criminal record, your socioeconomic backgrounds. All of these things can be tied to your to be based on what marginalized community you come from in the society. Thus, you're also still likely to be biased towards. Secondly, we think that they cannot just claim that because this is going to be in liberal democracies, this is going to be independent. Firstly, programmers who make these algorithms themselves, who are the only high-trained enough people to understand code to make them, still have biases themselves. Why are they unlikely to inherit those biases onto their algorithms? But secondly, we think that it's hard to avoid non-biased algorithms at the point of which you have countries such as Hungary and Poland, where a xenophobic government directly is creating decisions based on every sentence. Why is a xenophobic government likely to be unbiased? No clue. Okay, first argument, they talk about how the human random bias, it's some subconscious stuff and all of that. Firstly, we think that they overstretch this. Like, why are then people, why do we even have police? Why do we even have any sort of law enforcement, any person accountable for anything if it's so biased in the first place? But secondly, we think that judges have legal training. They are bound by ethical oath. They must account for their decisions and reason in published opinions. We think that comparative here is done that programmers lack each of these safeguards, and thus they're less likely to be accountable for the programs that they made than judges who are basically their entire reputation relies on having fair judgment. Also, we don't think we should necessarily support the status quo. We think that we can also support creating more conviction integrity units, which fair check these cases are being dealt with better. Second argument, they talk about how there's these algorithms are so can evolve and can make so many objective decisions. Here's the thing. Firstly, in order for an algorithm to work efficiently, you need a lot of training data from which it can learn from. The problem is that once you have biased old data which it is learning from, your algorithm will inherit the bias. For example, Amazon created a hiring algorithm which was learning from old resumes which predominantly came from men, and that algorithm was then biased against women because it didn't recognize female college degrees as something that was hireable because it wasn't in the past. Secondly, there's also a lack of transparency. Even if you recognize that your algorithm has a bias, it's very hard to fix that because algorithms are a black box in how they make their decisions. You basically just feed it data, it makes its decision and trade-offs, and then it gives you a conclusion. And you literally have no way to see what trade-offs it made. That's why when Apple had created a credit card algorithm, it gave different credit scores to a husband and wife, Apple had no idea why that happened, and it was unable to check that bias. I think it's extremely abhorrent that these sort of algorithms could be used in the judicial system. What is our stance then on side of opposition? We think that algorithms, sure, they do have a consulting value. They're able to process a lot of data. We recognize that, and thus we think they're able to aid the judges in creating awareness of hazards. We don't think that they should be able to make moral decisions in criminal sentences because they have an absence of transparency and they have lack human judgment benefits. We're going to put it in our arguments. Firstly, I'm going to talk about how algorithms worsen the systemic issues in the status quo. Secondly, about empathy. Philip will talk about morality. First argument then about how algorithms worsen the systemic issues. Listen, even if we take them at their best ground, if we have the best algorithm possible, unbiased in any sort of way, the problem is, as long as you have structural issues, that algorithm is still going to be biased towards you. Why? Because the point of which an African American is 50% more likely to be convicted for a crime than a white person is, or when you're 7 times more likely to be found guilty, that algorithm will still have to take in consideration those data, because there's a higher likelihood that you're going to have a past criminal record that algorithm is going to bias towards you. On a comparative, I'll take you in a second. Judges, if we have few racist judges in the status quo, we can redeem that injustice by getting you a new judge, by you having the ability to reappeal, to go to a new court. We can redeem those injustices. Before we go on to the second point, I'll take a POI quickly, please.
Look, if a racist judge under your side falsely convicts a black man, he is likely to give him a harsher punishment as well. Under our side, the AI is at least likely to spare him and give him a lenient one.
First of all, we think that exactly the point I was just talking about. At the point of which we have a few racist judges instead of opposition, we can redeem those injustices by getting you to reappeal, have a new judge, and so on, or replace the judge, or like we can have mechanisms to improve the situation. At the point of which you have a biased algorithm, you have a universal biased algorithm that is going to be racist on your side. Secondly, I think there are a lot of racist and harsh laws implemented in many states. In California, they have a 3 strikes law, which means that at the point of which you have a third offense for a crime that isn't even violent, by the way, you have to go to jail for 25 years. The thing is, prosecutors and judges understand that some laws are very harsh and unfair, and they try to devise innovative ways to avoid operations that would evoke them. For example, they either charge you with a different sentence that doesn't invoke that harsh sentence, or judges don't recognize certain evidence that deem it ambiguous, so they don't have to invoke that harsh sentence. The thing is that algorithm will automatically invoke those laws, even at the point of which they're very, very harsh and very unfair, and they're highly criticized, but the judges and the people are actually able to find loopholes. The thing is, the status quo is bad, but the judicial system is going to be worse because algorithms perpetuate the issue and deepen it at the point at which people cannot hamper anymore to find loopholes. Second argument about how we require empathy in the judicial process. Listen, within it, empathic judges are better at recognizing situational factors that impact a defendant's behavior. Within certain data is irreducible to algorithms because people sometimes don't want to admit that they were sexually abused in the past, or that they came from toxic households, right? Within it, human intuition and human perception is able to recognize how certain factors can coerce you into making certain decisions, and thus don't affiliated with bad character. That is exactly why in the status quo we have juries, because it had a human intuition recognizing when people are being coerced in certain things. Note, this isn't about people pretending that they're sad or saying that they're sorry. We think that judges aren't stupid as that. This is about genuine expression of anxiety, of shame, of remorse, of stress. Secondly, within it, sentencing decisions are actually more effective when we have empathy. Why? Because it doesn't make sense to punish someone who feels remorse equally to someone who doesn't. Because the remorseful defendant is less in need of a deterrence because he already feels sorry for what he did. He's less likely to engage in criminal conduct in the future. However, an algorithm is likely going to sentence that person equally as someone who is unremorseful. And that is problematic because at the point at which you have a person who isn't likely going to commit a crime in the future, but you put them in prison, you keep them away from their communities, you keep them away from employment, you keep them away from their families, and you're increasing the likelihood to offend again once they come out of the society because you take away their options. Within it, empathy has a unique role in the judicial system. It is able to include those benefits and those actors. We recognize not every judge is empathic. However, we can maximize that empathy with diversifying judges, with getting people from different backgrounds in the judging pool. Within it, we can get people who are able to understand different perspectives. However, the bottom line is that you need human judgment in order to do that. Algorithms are unable to do that, and because people need faith in the judicial system, they need to be able to understand that the judicial system is going to appear to them. You need people for that, not algorithms. Panel, algorithms are far too objective to be fair. Thank you.
Thank you very much to that speaker for an excellent speech. And I would like to invite the second proposition speaker to continue the case for their side whenever you're ready.
We think that it is convenient for side opposition to use the word empathy in this debate, because we think empathy is just a euphemism for a halo effect. We think on average, when the average age of a judge is 68 years and when they are predominantly white, they are more likely to discriminate against black people than be empathetic because California has a bad jurisdiction, right? This is the comparative that we engage in. Three things. Firstly, rehabilitation. Secondly, rebuttal. And third, my own split argument about consistency. So firstly, let's take a look at our model. Here I have 3 points of rehabilitation. The first thing that side opposition tells us here is that systems such as Compass in the status quo are already discriminatory, and we don't support these systems because these are not artificial intelligence systems and they are programmed by private companies, whereas we want the state to actively take initiative and to therefore take responsibility, which gives the state extra motivation to scrutinize the system as much as possible, right? But secondly, we say that like you cannot just have one racist programmer within the like team of experts and make that racist programmer program a racist AI. No, thank you. The cases that we will feed the AI will be handpicked specifically in order to avoid like any amount of biases possible, right? And this is really important. No, thank you, because then their characterization is flawed. We will like not feed the AI a case where a judge literally made a racist decision. Like obviously, guys, come on, right? But thirdly, then they talk here about Poland, right? We say that Poland isn't even in our model because it's not necessarily like a super liberal democracy where the judiciary is as excluded from the government, right? No, thank you. But also, if you want to have Poland under your side, then you also have to fiat the problems in the status quo in Poland, such as like the mass discrimination against the LGBTQ minority. And note that opposition has never, not even once, like engaged with the status quo. What they have told us was that like, oh, we can educate the judges in like a POI, right? Like they never provided a mechanism. And this is important because what Victor tells you in his second argument is that we can scrutinize the system better. Because if one judge makes a mistake in the status quo and we correct it, we are never sure that another judge won't make the mistake again. But if the algorithm does it, we have a 100% certainty that after the correction, this will never happen again. And this is the comparative that you should engage in. No, thank you. Now in terms of our like second argument, or like in terms of, our first argument. So 3 things here as well. The first thing is that they didn't really engage in the nuance, because what they tell you is judges have like an incentive to not do bad things. But Victor gives you structural analysis about like subconscious biases that you cannot control for. Therefore, it was not responded. But secondly, they talk to you about the black box problem, why you can't see inside the mind of an AI, right? We tell you that you cannot really see inside of the mind of a judge either, right? And when a judge doesn't give you parole because he has like literally low blood glucose levels, no thank you. And note that like the rate of giving parole went from 63% to almost 0% because he was far from lunch. And the judge then starts like quoting Socrates or whatever. They also are not giving you a proper explanation. But we also tell you that we have a way to bypass the black box problem, right? And that is something, and you do that when you like alter the inputs that you put into the AI by a small bit, right? So maybe you alter the extent of alcoholism that the convict has, and the AI gives you a different sentence. Through these small incremental changes, you are able to like extrapolate the way in which the AI system is making decisions. No, thank you. This is called counterfactual explanation, and it is right now being implemented and quite effectively deals with the black box problem, right? Now let's take a look at their first argument about systemic issues, right? Note that they did not even engage a small bit with what Victor tells you about why sentences are 19.1% longer for black people under their side, which is something that we categorically no thank you and uniquely solve, right? But secondly, if they talk about like systemic problems with justice in California, we think this should be solved through changing the law, not through like relying that a judge will, give you a bit of empathy on this day. We don't think that they offer you a good solution. Now to their second argument about like the process certain data. I'll take you in a second. We say that like the judge is already there to process specific data in terms of like assigning guilt, right? So even if this was true, we already say that the judge is involved to a sufficient extent, but they disagree. You can go ahead.
If algorithms are as great as Prop claims they are, why don't they take them into account when convicting defendants as well?
We say that like in general, we want to essentially police the parts of justice which are the most problematic in the status quo, right? You will have to explain to us why it is necessarily so good to implement them in other areas as well, right? But note that the second response to their second argument about the process is the fact that AI can already factor in like extenuating circumstances, right? Because you can feed this specific type of data into the algorithm and it can calculate that. Now let's take a look at my own split argument concerning why we bring more consistency to sentencing under our side, right? Because note that not only are judges self-consistent like with themselves, right? A same judge can give a different sentence to the same case based off of like blood glucose levels or like their experience, but also note that different judges can judge the same case differently, right? That is like the entire reason why they have appeals. No, thank you. This is very important because it means that in the status quo, there is inconsistency in terms of giving sentences. And this is problematic for two main reasons. The first one concerns the principle, because we want to eliminate as much arbitrary factors from justice. Because insofar as you administrate justice based off of randomness, we say that you're harming the dignity of the person. I shouldn't be judged differently just because I live in a different city in Germany and I got a different judge there, right? We think that this factor of randomness should be eliminated, right? But moreover, let's talk about the practical benefits of this argument. And these are like really great. So we have two of them. First one talks about the trust in the state. Because in the status quo, the justice system is riddled with appeals. Because everyone thinks that a different judge will judge them differently, right? And they rely on this like human inconsistency. But note that this, and like when we make it consistent, people are more likely to actually trust the institution because they know that they can get consistent results, right? But note that like moreover, Black people in the United States are less likely to plead guilty because they don't want to be sentenced by a racist judge, because they know that the judge will give them an unfair sentence and that ends up discriminating them even more, right? Note that we categorically remove like the biased judge from administering sentences, which literally eliminates this incentive of Black people to not plead guilty and to not trust the state. But secondly, we talk about deterrence. Because insofar as you eliminate a degree of randomness when someone is calculating like if they should or shouldn't do a crime, you are making it more obvious to them that they will get punished and increasing deterrence. And this is especially important for white-collar crime. Because rich white people in the status quo maybe know that they will get convicted, but because they know good lawyers, because they have personal ties with the judge, or because they have other ways to like go around the law, they know that they will weasel themselves out of this and get a small sentence. We say that AI systems are colorblind. We say that they do not factor in emotions and they are not slaves to their own biological needs in their body. And that is why you vote proposition.
Thank you very much for that excellent speech. And I will ask the second speaker for side opposition to continue their case whenever they're ready.
Honorable panel, I certainly hope you ate a sandwich before this round, because otherwise you might cast the ballot for the team that contradicts themselves in their own speech. You might cast the ballot for the team which talks about racist judges, who is the team who is encoding systemic racism into the cases which applies for everybody who is under the justice system under their model. In second opposition, three very simple things. One, negation to the second argument brought up by proposition, and then two points under the question of who has better justice, about biases, about empathy, before lastly going into our third constructive, where we shall talk about how we need morality to make decisions into the justice system, right? First things first, they talk about inconsistency. This is an inconsistency on proposition at a point of which we want to say to you that when we have a justice systems, you can simply cannot have consistency in a sense that you have the same decisions all the time, right? They themselves talk about how current justice systems is riddled with appeals. Great. This is brilliant. At a point of which we have systemic issues, you need to have the idea of appeal in order to appeal to decisions who are actually being made there, right? It's on opposition where we have those mechanisms. It's on proposition where you have an objective tool which can determine always the best solutions and the best sentencing decisions for them. When we talk about case-specific sentences, this is the idea of the due process, right? In order for justice systems to be fair, you need to have individualized specific cases, right? They want to have justice system which is fixed for all. On the other side of the house, we no, thank you. We actually have individual systems where judges take into account individual cases specifically. This is the unique comparative that they have to engage with, right? Lastly, we also need to talk about how this violates the idea of challenging the decision at the point of which you cannot appeal to a higher court, right? At a point of which they want to talk about inconsistency and they want to talk about the idea how you have the same justice system after all. At the world of proposition, you have only code which only sends you to prison because of the same conditions and the same parameter it takes into account. It's an opposition where we have better mechanisms such as appeal, no thank you, and appealing to a higher court, which is something unique on opposition. Moving on to the second point of my speech, which will be about the model, right? Because they want to actually, at this point, I don't really know what they want to claim on proposition, right? Because in first prop, we hear all about AI and how those algorithms make decisions all by their own, how they grade and not bias. We already given the attack of the idea how the state, which is the judicial system which takes laws into account, it's the state that it can be biased and can implement those biases within the code, right? They say this is not debate about Poland. They're clearly scrolling out this motion at the point of which they themselves said this is a global system they implement in the first proposition. But furthermore, it's not only about those, no, thank you. It's not only about programmers. It's the programs who make decisions for everybody, right? At a point of which we on opposition have some racist judges, but have very nice judges who rule very fairly. It's very much better that we have diversity in opposition, where if they have a racist programmer, you have racist laws which apply for everybody. This is a much worse off solution on proposition. But furthermore, notice that it's not only about the biases that the programmers have. It's also about the decisions that those algorithms can simply not make by themselves, right? They conveniently ignore our point of empathy. No, thank you. They conveniently ignore, and I shall talk more about morality in the first place. So even if they want to claim efficiency, which clearly they don't, they cannot take into account because it's impossible to encode certain things, such as remorse, such as morality, and so on. But further on, right? About biases, because proposition is all about like eliminating human biases because you had lunch before you make the decisions or because you are racist just. Notice that there are very, very minimal impacts that the proposition has at the point of which you are eliminating this simply because, you can make more, I'll take you in a second, fair decisions. Eating a sandwich before making a call is not something that detrimentally impacts your decisions at the point of which you are a judge who spent 10 years going to law school, who has experience in the field, and who is a person who people can actually appeal to if something goes wrong. You have a POI.
Yeah, like we think that it's reprehensible that you say that the fact that Black people are sentenced to 19.1% longer sentences, even when considering past offenses, is something that is like not as important, right? You should engage with this.
Thank you for the POI, sir. Exactly the next point in my speech. About the biases, right? Because proposition is only all about eliminating bias. But notice the nuance which we already give you in first opposition. Because sure, the algorithm might not see the color of your skin when you are in the courtroom. But what do they see? They see all the other parameters which are encoded into the algorithm. They see stuff such as the neighborhood you live in. They see stuff such as education you go through, right? They see past criminal offenses, which are proxies for race and which are racist things that are encoded into the justice systems. No, thank you. But notice the comparative which proposition never engages with, which is the systemic issues that you have, right? At a point of which you're more likely not only to get arrested as a Black person, but more likely to get stop search, which is something that you freeze on your criminal record. At this point, when you have a racist algorithm which makes racist decisions always because it's encoded in the code, this is something very detrimental for those minorities right there, right? But now lastly, right? Because they want to ignore human empathy. At a point of which MI has 4 minutes talking about how it's not the same, at a point of which you feel remorse for the crime you did, it's something that it's impossible for the algorithm to encode. But secondly, even if they want to claim that if you want to put that in, it's again the humans that have to encode that in. Then it's the humans who should take the decisions, not the algorithms. And ultimately, it's about the convictions, right? Because at a point of which you have all the harms that Prop wants to talk about, it's about the convictions, not about the sentencing. This is something they have to engage with. With this in mind, third argument then on opposition, how humans are needed for moral decision making. We have 2 layers here. Firstly, how algorithms are structurally unable to make moral decision making. And secondly, even if they are, because of changing of morality, is something that we need humans for to make those kind of decisions. First of all, they cannot interpret information. It's in the nature of algorithms as analytical tools to process information in an analytical manner. This means processing data, which the proposition talks about, right? At this point, it's impossible for the algorithm to actually interpret information about the crimes specifically that happen. the examples that we have here are like hate crimes, people giving Nazi salute, like vandalizing sacred sites or attacks on religious holidays. At this point, this is something of a moral decision-making that we need humans to take into account for, right? Because it makes a difference if a terrorist attack on a mosque happened during Ramadan or if it happened during just a normal day. At this point, the sentence should be different, and it's based on the moral decision-making that uniquely humans possess, which they can make this decision for. Secondly, algorithms omit certain data, right? Because it's much more likely on our side of the house where judges can actually take the whole bigger picture into account at a point of which they take into account, for example, what the sentence does for the family of the defendant and so on. And in their world, it's simply the algorithm operates within this data set which they are pre-given. This is something uniquely we've changed on our position where we have human judges who have those capabilities. But now secondly, right? Even if you have morality which is encoded into the human algorithms, it's something that humans need to put into, right? Therefore, we need to have a certain moral code which we have to encode into algorithms and for under which those algorithms can operate. And in a world where we have changing morality, for example, when gay sex was permitted by law and it was considered a bad moral person if you did something like that, we need a human judgment in order to cope with the changing morality on the side of the house. But notice the comparative. Because sure, on second argument or proposition, they want to talk about how they changed stuff around, right? The key distinction is that we need humans to make those moral decisions, should not be left up to zeros and ones who make those kind of decisions. Panel, it's clear that you vote for the side of the opposition for three main things. One, because we're actually showing to do positive changes that we have on our side of the house, where we have a diversity of judges versus the one racist encoded code that they have on proposition. Secondly, because we show you that we have unique human factors that you need to take into account, such as morality, such as empathy. And ultimately, because we're decided that brings better judges for all, you should stick with opposition.
Thank you very much for that excellent speech. And I will invite the third proposition speaker to continue the case for their side when they are ready to begin.
The fact that the members of minority groups are discriminated in the status quo and have to live lives of not the full quality and not fulfilling their full potential in the world of side of opposition is something the side of opposition provides no solution whatsoever. Therefore, these minorities in their world have no chance of improvement, and they can only rely on some worlds of empathy or some like human intuition, even though we have already explained to you how this empathy is flawed and rather goes against those vulnerable minorities we want to protect. What I'm going to do in my speech are two things. First, I'm going to talk about which side has more biased judgment. And secondly, I will talk about how it is important to have, in the long run, the scrutiny over the protest and the consistency overall. But before that, let's take a look at strategy. Because here we believe that the side of opposition is, when it is arguing against certain parts of our case, they're arguing like if the AI should take over all the judicial system that we have in the status quo. But this is crucial because we're talking only about sentencing right now. Therefore, when they talk about how you cannot appeal against the decision, you can appeal because you still has this idea of the guilt and not guilty, the fact that this is still decided by the human judge. Because we believe that they're set criteria because here the bias is really less likely. But secondly, we tell you, no thank you, that because we're talking just about sentencing, like a huge part of their reactions are fallen, because still, even if we take them at their best and say that like this human element is necessary, we don't take the human element away altogether. But we believe that even this step towards artificial intelligence is a good step and is the only chance of improvement in today's debate. Secondly, in the strategy or lack of reactions by side of proposition, especially when we talked about the inherent biases, subconscious biases that we have in our human nature, and the fact that our human biology does not really provide us with rational decision-making process. And secondly, there came no reaction whatsoever as we have faster response to law changes, and therefore as we can cater to those minorities with the example of LGBTQ community that we were talking about. So now when I dealt with strategy, what are the impacts of those like lack of reactions? We believe that majority of our content is still standing in today's debate. We have provided you why this system is effective and why this system is just. But now, before I move to analysis of why the side of opposition has more biased judgment, let's take a look at some model clarification, as the side of opposition is constantly strawmanning us with some racist programmer that we should have under our side of the house. What we told you is that we will have oversight body. It won't be one programmer, but it will be a number of experts from various fields. So these problems and these biases, I will take you in a second, will be discussed and will be eliminated. We also have this testing period that is crucial, because even if there was some mistake throughout the testing, we are able to eliminate it through the counterfactual explanations. We have already provided you the mechanisms in our second speech with no reaction from opposition. Yes.
If judicial panels are also so biased that you want to replace them with algorithms, why those same panels that create the algorithms are not? No structural analysis here.
Thank you. So we believe that the decision-making process of these two agencies is totally different, because when you make this judgment in the court, you are deciding over the life of one person, and here we believe that the bias is much more prone to happen. But when you have discussion in this like oversight body, and when you decide to give their data that are not biased, because you have this input from like diversity of members of this panel, you are much less likely to have this bias present. But even if that was not true, we tell you that the artificial intelligence from its nature is capable of reinforced learning. Therefore, even if there were some patterns that are like not effective for the society, we believe that these would be eliminated, such as the process for more rehabilitation and for like a lower reoffense rates that would be taken into consideration. Second idea under model was also that their split argument how AI cannot make moral decisions. Here what we tell you is first that again AI is not over like whole judicial system, it's not the world that we want to. And secondly, we tell you that we can suggest this morality here because we still have this human oversight. But even if that was not true, they still did not provide us with any analysis whatsoever of why they don't have immoral decisions under their side of the house. Because humans can make immoral decisions, especially concerning those minorities we want to protect. So, which side has more biased judgment? Two layers here. First about human judges, and secondly about AI. So now the judges. What we told you here is that we have inherent human nature, which does not really allow us to make like the best decision, because we cannot take all the factors into consideration. We don't have like this power artificial intelligence has. What the side of opposition told us is the importance of empathy. But this empathy is again dependent on this subconscious layer. So therefore, if you are subconsciously discriminatory towards the minority group, you won't have empathy towards this group, and therefore inherently under the side of opposition, this minority is discriminated, and this minority is therefore in a worse state. Secondly here, what we told you is that there are many judges who has this like bias with the example of 19% longer sentences for Afro-Americans in the United States. Note that there was no reaction whatsoever of how the side of opposition is going to repair this exact number, because we believe that they provide no help for those individuals that we have in the world and that we should protect. And finally here, we told you that these people are able to make immoral judgment. Again, the reaction to their split argument, because when those people believe that the minority that it is right to have like this like systemic racism, this immoral judgment is much more likely. But now let's take a look at the comparative of why artificial intelligence is better. We believe that when they talk about bigger picture, the artificial intelligence is the stakeholder that has it, because it can take into consideration all the factors that we need, and we believe that then therefore it can make the best decision ever. and because of this huge persistent power. But even if we tell you that the AI will make some mistakes, we have unique mechanism of solving it, because when you solve this one mistake, you solve it forever. But when you have one biased judge in the system, and you tell him like not to be biased, you cannot solve and repair all the other judges in the system. And this is something unique, and this is something not responded by side of opposition. So finally, what we told you is that we have scrutiny over the system, and we have the system that is consistent. Note that there were also no reaction to this like consistency idea, that we need to have the same approach to all the members of the society as such. For all those reasons, very proud to propose.
Thank you very much for that excellent speech. And I will ask the third speaker for side opposition to continue the case for their side.
Dear panel, yesterday I realized that I'm a high-risk offender. Do you know why? Because I answered on a Compass test that I think law works against ordinary people. Because suddenly Compass takes into account what ordinary people think about law, and those are the mechanisms that side proposition is defending. Because know that when they talk about these theoretical abstractions, 500 years in the future, where we will have artificial intelligence that will be able to do everything the same as humans, only without biases, they are ignoring the painful reality of algorithms that happens in status quo. When people are judged for longer sentences simply because they answer on a political question differently as algorithm wants. 2 comments on strategy on side of proposition. First of all, we don't think that this debate is taking place 200 years in the future. We want to debate the reality. We agree that algorithms are making things more consistent. We agree that algorithms are able to process more data. We refuse to engage with some sci-fi knowledge about artificial intelligence. Regardless of this, no thank you, I will engage as if they have proven that they will have artificial intelligence throughout my classes. Second comment on strategies, we still don't understand why they don't want this artificial intelligence to do convictions as well, if it is so perfect as opposition claims. Because at the point where they say humans are so biased, why do we not take into account the convictions when black people are 7 times more likely to be convicted for a crime than white people? No response from proposition. So 2 clashes in my speech. No, thank you. Firstly, are algorithms biased? And secondly, do we need humans? So the first clash about bias, right? Note that the whole case of proposition, which is about protecting the marginalized communities, is contingent on them proving that algorithms are not biased. Because if algorithms are biased, then they get more consistent enforcement of biases, something they are themselves against it. So why does the side of opposition win the class of bias? First of all, because we already tell you in first opposition that while algorithms do not take into account a color of your skin, they take into account race proxies. What does this mean? They ask you how many juvenile arrests you have had in the future, meaning that communities that were impacted by over-policing policies, such as black communities in the United States of America, are way more likely to be designated as people with harsh sentences. Note that Compass, the algorithm that exists in status quo, predicts this accurately only 40% of the time. Secondly, they take a look at your housing policies, about your family convictions. So they are not even giving you an individualized sentence, something that Philip talked about. Why do we care about individualized sentence? Because we don't think everyone is simply a number. We don't think that you can predict my own behavior based on how much my parents earn, based on which house I live in. This is something they have never responded to. So why do we tell you that humans are better at making those decisions? So what's the comparative here? 3 layers here. Firstly, we tell you the diversity in judicial system matters. At a point when in Texas in 2018, the Democrats were able to elect most of the judges in the most red state in the United States of America, we tell you the diversity that you see in the judicial system actually works for the marginalized communities 99% of the cases. Why is this so? 2 mechanisms. Firstly, because judges actually go to law school, as Philip and Emma told you about. They learn there how to appropriately interpret the law, how to not be biased against marginalized groups. Secondly, we tell you that it's always better to have this diversity than to have a consistently bad application of an algorithm, because we don't want people to spend 25 years in jail because of 3 strikes laws. They never tell us why those people who get off on the outside of the house should accept the harsher punishments given by algorithms on their side of the house. Secondly, we talk about appeal, how you are actually able to scrutinize judicial decisions with the appeal system when you can always go to a higher court. No response from opposition, but no proposition. But know that this takes out their whole argument about scrutiny, because we tell you that those mechanisms exist to a symmetric extent on both sides of the house. However, lastly, we tell you that we are able to minimize the biases they talk about with more judicial training, with all the things that they want to talk about. However, lastly, right, on which side of the house is judicial reform more likely to happen? We tell you that this is certainly not going to happen on the side of proposition. Why? Emma already starts off when she tells you that algorithms give you a consistently bad sentences everywhere. What does this do? It displaces the problem from the problem of the judicial system, from the problem of the judiciary, to the individual racist judges that we see in status quo. We think that in those situations, it's much harder to actually fight for judicial reform, as Philip highlighted, right? Because you have to fight against the algorithm, against the higher logic of processing that they defend on opposition. So at the end of this clash, right, we believe that we take that the algorithms are biased to a large extent, especially when it comes to marginalized communities. And we are willing to trade this off for the sandwich bias the side of proposition talks about, because we don't think that it actually impacts sentencing that much as they overblow it. However, secondly, even if it does, it also affects convictions, so we don't know what they want. So but look, let's take them at their best. Even if algorithms are never biased, why do we still need human judgment, and why do we still defend human judgment on our side? We give you 2 specific arguments here that they never really get a proper response from proposition. Firstly, we tell you that we need empathy in judicial system in order to process non-quantifiable data, such as the feelings of remorse that people feel when they actually did something bad and they are defending themselves in court. Emma tells you that you can never get that with algorithms, because it's simply not numbers, ones and zeros, that you can put it in a system and then they predict this. However, secondly, we also don't think that algorithms are ever going to be capable, I will take you in a second, to make moral decisions. But before that, yes.
Are you going to be empathetic to a person who is not in general, you don't think that has really sympathy towards you?
Look, no. We are not saying that everyone is perfect and that every judge is empathetic. We tell you that in majority of cases, judges are empathetic. Look, racist judges certainly exist on our side of the house, but we are telling you that benefits of the current system outweigh the harms of the proposal they are bringing to the table. This is a comparative debate, not a debate about which side is able to get 100% perfection down. Secondly, Philip tells you that they are unable to make moral decisions. 2 reasons. One, because they can't interpret some data, such as hate crime, because they cannot really feel emotions, even the AI cannot feel them. Secondly, because certain cases are without precedent, right? You have cases when people consent to harm being done to them, and you don't really know how to engage with them. And we think algorithms are unable to make those decisions because they simply cannot process the moral questions. And this is not a question of whether they make a good moral decision or a bad moral decision, as third prop characterizes, but this is a question of whether it is capable to have a moral consideration in the first place in the algorithm. And we tell you consistently that this is not possible. So even if we take them at their best, there are still situations where we need human judgments in the judicial system. That's why we are taking the debate even at their highest ground. For all of those reasons, the panel opts for the side which actually brings justice, opt for empathy.
Thank you very much for that excellent speech. And I will invite the opposition reply speaker to summate the case for their side whenever they are ready.
Considering what we know about algorithms such as Compass, which in the US judiciary system is 2 times more likely to falsely accuse African American of being high risk, considering Apple credit algorithm, which was biased, and even Apple programmers itself didn't know why and how to fix it. And we look at Amazon, which had a hiring algorithm which was literally trained to be sexist towards women. Within the set of propositions, should have done a lot more to explain to us, give us some analysis why is it that their algorithms are likely to be different. We don't leave them saying, look, it's AI is enough, especially at the point at which when you're creating an algorithm that is universally going to judge whether you have to be imprisoned for 5 years or 15. Very happy to oppose. 2 questions in this debate. Firstly, we talked about the bias, right? When is the human bias likely to be in the way of a fair judicial system, and why are algorithms less likely to be biased? Firstly, within the set of opposition, did some analysis talking about how there's like the sandwich effect, you being hungry, making a wrong decision. Within it, firstly, the way they explained it, it seems to me that every sort of human decision is likely to be extremely bad and racist, and I don't know why exactly should we let humans judge anything. But secondly, within it, we need to look at the comparative. Where is that human bias, if it exists, going to be worse? On the side of opposition, where you have judges, whose reputation, job and public opinion is going to depend on whether they make a fair decision, or on their programmers making their algorithms who have zero accountability to what sort of algorithm they make in the first place. But thirdly, we talked about how we also have certain degrees of way we can reduce that bias in the status quo. But secondly, within a set of proposition didn't do enough to tell us why are their algorithms unlikely to be biased. Because we think that the way the structures of algorithms is how they work, the way they are untransparent in how they make the decisions, the way that they have to be trained from all data in order to be effective, in order to be able to make decisions in the first place. Why is it that there's less likely to be objective and inherit those biases? No response. But we think that when we look at the comparative, right, when we look at the world and we see that algorithms right now, which are very likely to inherit biases and are going to be unfair to people, which are going to be, and this algorithm is going to be universally implemented, versus the world of opposition, where we have some racist judges, but we have mechanisms in a way to fix them. We don't have mechanisms to fix algorithms, and we don't know where the bias is coming from. But thirdly, within the side of opposite proposition, didn't address the fact that there is like a clear, unique benefit of empathy when it comes to fairly deciding what sort of sentence someone deserves. Because we think that, listen, we don't need the same approach for everyone at the point at which you make a crime because you have bad character, or when you make a crime because you were coerced by your traumatic childhood experience, or you were coerced by situational factors. Humans are uniquely able to recognize the difference between the two, and and are uniquely able to make an appropriate decision in the sentence, because we think that a remorseful offendant is like less likely to recommit at the point to which he's not imprisoned for a few years. Second question, where is better for marginalized communities, because these are the people who are largely harmed in the status quo. Firstly, we told you how algorithms deepen the structural issue, not respond by a set of proposition. Because we told you that at the point of which you have an algorithm making a decision, you take away the ability to re-appeal to that judgment, because the algorithm will always make the same decision. It has the same data, it has the same mechanisms. On the other side of the house, you get a new judge, you go to a hard court, we have mechanisms to redeem the injustices. Secondly, we tell you some states have harsh laws which algorithms will automatically use in its decision-making processes. But even when those harsh laws, tough on crime political agendas, are criticized in society, judges and prosecutors are able to find loopholes because they know it's unfair to defendants. Thirdly, we think that we don't eliminate the empathy, which is actually the one thing that is able to recognize that someone from a marginalized community is being given a harsh sentence, because we are the one who are uniquely having mechanisms to solve the status quo, because we recognize that the way algorithms work is going to worsen the situation. Please vote for side of opposition.
Thank you very much for that excellent speech. And I will invite the proposition reply speaker to summate the case for their side and finish the debate as a whole.
We find it convenient that side opposition tells us that we can train judges to not be biased, when literally all of the examples that we gave to you were from the status quo, where the judges are already trained in this way. We find it funny that they keep talking about this compass algorithm, when literally in Prop 2 we said, hey, we don't want this. This is not an AI system. This is programmed by a private company, not by the state, right? Note, they have been keeping this level of a lack of comparative throughout their entire 3 speeches. And that is why the first thing that I'm focusing on is strategic mistakes. 3 ones to point out here. First thing is that they never properly engaged with the status quo, right? Because from Victor's speech, he tells you that what we want from them is an account for how they solve that, right? Because even though they can like critique our own system, they have more racism and they have more biases, right? They only said that they don't have to. And when Victor tells you that Black people are on average have 19.1% longer sentences, what they respond to that is like so uncomparative, right? Because what they say to you is, oh, the system will evaluate past offenses and police are still racist. But like they completely missed it, because Victor said that this is even if we account for past offenses. This is an exclusive bias of the judges that they have never responded to, right? And this is something that stands exclusively under our side. But note that they have completely neglected Victor's 3 structural reasons as to why judges are likely to decide wrongly. What they have done is made like funny remarks about, haha, the sandwich problem. We don't think that it is funny for a mother to miss 2 extra birthdays of her son because someone had low blood glucose levels, and we find it reprehensible that they were joking about this exact issue. But secondly, under this point about strategic issues, they completely strawmanned our model, right? They said, oh, judges are biased, all people are biased, everything is biased, blah, 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 right? Like this didn't engage with our nuance. What we told you is that we handpick a system of experts from different like academic fields, that the people there will be intersectional and represent specific minorities, and that this will be subject to rigorous testing, right? Like note how they never engaged with this level of nuance, right? And when they talk to you about like how you can't reduce people to ones and zeros, like literally when the system, and this is something that Victor said, is able to like study 100,000 cases and extrapolate connections between specific information, it personalizes the data better than an average judge ever could, right? But they talk about systems like Compass when we like explicitly said that we don't care about them at all. And they talk about appeals when Elena already said that we will have appeals in our system, right? But the third strategic mistake is backloading. Note that their third op like completely developed the point about judicial change, and that he like was like completing other points that we did not have a chance to respond to, and we would really like to if we could have. Okay, now to a long-term, short-term comparative, right? Because in the short term, we believe that what they have to fiat is biases. It's the fact that a judge decides differently because he didn't have his lunch. It's the fact that judges are more likely to be racist because their average age is 68 and because they are mostly white. What they have to fiat is the fact that Black people are afraid to plead guilty because they are afraid of racist judges, right? Sure, we might have some biases in our algorithm, but Elena was able to show you why, on average, like a local judge in Texas will be more biased than a team of handpicked experts. But in the long run, right, even if we were to lose the short one, we told you that we can better correct the system. Because if one judge messes up and you correct him, another judge will do the same, but the system won't. Because we can better implement new laws when we like decriminalize homophobia, when we decriminalize like gay marriage, whereas they say that judges should decide based off of their own morals, which intuitively like you should give the debate to side proposition. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that excellent speech, and thank you to all of our speakers for what was an excellent debate. If we'd been in person, I would have been giving you a big round of applause. I could have done it here, but you couldn't hear me, and I could have visualized it, but you know I was writing. So I'll give you a visual round of applause just now for what was an excellent debate. Okay, so the process now is that I need to inform the ORGCOM that we have finished our debate so the judges can be moved to deliberate on that. Hopefully that will be as quick as possible for you. The aim is it'll take around 20 minutes. If we're longer than that, I will blame technology and say it is not the fault of the judges. We'll hopefully be back as quickly as possible for you. And this time you guys can chat. I would normally make a joke about comparing the weather, but you guys are actually pretty close geographically, I think, so I don't know how different your weather is, but you can make friends and generally be happy and do the things you would normally do in a physical competition. Excellent. In that case, the way this process will work is I'll give the call and a justification for the call, and then we'll divide up into feedback I'll try and keep it as limited as possible, so we've got as much time as feedback for possible, because that is kind of more useful for you guys going on in the competition. So I think this was a very, very good debate. I think it was well done from both teams. I think it was a very close debate, and that was represented in the decision, which was a split decision. What I'll do is I'll give you the call, and then I'll give you a justification for why the judges came to that call. So overall, it was a split decision, but the win was given to side opposition. So congratulations to side opposition. The reason for that, I think there's two main reasons for that. They're tied up in the kind of two key clashes that came up in the debate. I think, firstly, we really, really liked the mechanism that came out from proposition. I thought that was really, really good. I thought you were quite creative with a model to go with kind of this like hypothetical algorithm that was new and to take on the burden of AI. I thought that was a really brave decision, a really good tactical decision as well. And I think it made for a very, very interesting debate. That said, we think there were kind of two main points of clash in the debate, and I'll keep saying that it was a split decision, so there were different views on this. Okay, but kind of the first clash was the biggest one in the debate, and it was basically about like structural bias and racism. Kind of two things encompassed that. Would this algorithm be racist, and which side better accounts for bias in the judicial system? Okay, so proposition give us this idea that judges are bad. They give us some very strong structural analysis for why human beings are poor at making these decisions based on their mental state, based on when they had lunch. And then they told us that the algorithm would be much better than this because it can learn lessons from past cases in a way that is far more efficient than humans. That we're going to have a committee set up that's intersectional and diverse to create this algorithm, and that there's going to be quite a lot of scrutiny on this because of constant updates. They also tell us this kind of just applies to Western liberal democracies. And then what we get from opposition is that we get a little bit more nuance throughout the debate to say, well, maybe not all judges are structurally biased. And it's fair to say that proposition were maybe a little bit extreme with categorizing all judges with this structural bias. And whilst we can probably accept that, yes, the hunger does have some effect, opposition mitigate by saying that, well, these are professionals, they've trained for years and years and years, their decision is probably going to be made on more ultimately than just that sandwich. They also tell us that judges can be replaced and they can get more training and give us mechanisms for how the status quo can actually be improved on their side. Okay, I think kind of where the strongest material comes from opposition is targeting the algorithm and highlighting the fact that this algorithm is quite possibly going to be racist. Okay, so there's a few reasons why I think that some of the judges had sufficient doubt about whether this algorithm could be unbiased. Okay, so firstly, opposition gave us lots of examples of algorithms in the status quo that have actually turned out to be biased and racist themselves. Proposition tell us that this isn't what their algorithm is going to be like, and that their algorithm is going to be different. A lot of this comes down to the idea that it's going to be like state-controlled against private AI, which is in the status quo. And I think kind of the issues you have here that you're kind of defending hypothetical AI, but you can't give us any examples of where this has been done. And we're left going with the examples in the status quo of where it doesn't actually work. And in terms of the difference between private and state, I'm not clear how this would actually work when presumably the state government is going to outsource this algorithm to a private company, as we've seen with like the American police using the Amazon AI software. So I'm not sure exactly where the benefits would come from the fact that this is state-run, and I think that's something that could have benefited from more analysis. I think also on the idea of like just liberal governments, opposition broadened the debate up a little bit more to say, well, no, you'll need to take into account different governments. So for example, Poland, where they might introduce actually a structurally biased algorithm. And I think it's fair for proposition to defend most of their examples on liberal democracies, because they'll probably have little power to change kind of the countries that are very, very structurally biased in any case. But it's also fair for opposition to highlight the fact that, well, if these countries introduce this, it might make it even worse. And this is something that opposition could have done more of as a little bit of feedback. But I think that was something that provided a sufficient harm for their side. And then what I think was the strongest kind of analysis on this that we got from opposition was the idea of racism proxies, and the idea that this algorithm would have to take into account things like judicial arrest, things like family background, things like propensity to commit crime. And these are things that are all going to probably lead to ethnic minorities, marginalized communities being unfairly targeted. And they compare that to the status quo when they say that's what we've seen under the algorithms that we've seen in the status quo. And I don't think we hear a sufficient response from proposition to this. All we hear is that no, there will be constant scrutiny. We'll have people in place to try and fix these things. But I think there you're kind of defending your model, but not really giving us any analysis to back that up, just saying our system will be better than that. But I think there was quite a lot of strong analysis on there. And then I kind of think the second point of clash was this idea about human necessity and are humans necessary for this? And there's kind of a key point in the debate, or it's debated whether it's a key point in the debate, where opposition ask why not have this algorithm at all levels of the court system? Why not have it in terms of juries? Why not have it in terms of police? And proposition basically say, well, that's not their burden to defend. But I think crucially, they also said at one point, they're highlighting the areas that are worst. And then opposition actually gave us examples of why conviction rates are really bad for African Americans too in America. So that questions that area. So some judges didn't think it was all that important in this area, some did. I think it was a weakness from proposition not to respond to this idea, because that kind of gave weight to opposition basically saying, well, they know they don't want this at all levels because at some level they need human interaction. That was kind of lent credence in the later proposition speeches where you raised the idea of an appeal process. So that wasn't fully fleshed out, but it was basically saying, no, there will still be appeals to this, we can still make change. But then as a judge, I'm left wondering, if people need to appeal against the algorithm to a human at the final stage, then what is the point in the algorithm in the first place? And I see no real difference there from the status quo when someone can appeal against their decision from a standard judge. And I think in contrast to that, what we get from opposition is we get human empathy that's somewhat mitigated by proposition when they give us really good analysis about how these subconscious biases can negate that empathy. But then opposition gives a little bit more nuance where they talk about specific areas where humans are necessary. So in examples of laws that might be outdated, so example like the 3 strikes policy where the judge might be able to step in and do something more reasonable, where its algorithm would be a bit cold and efficient. There weren't many responses to that from proposition. And then I think there was a really strong point throughout the opposition case about kind of new issues, about how is the algorithm going to deal with a crime that's completely new or something that's quite unique. And that's something that's not really responded to from proposition. And again, leaves me as a judge thinking, well, at some point, I think human nature is necessary to actually identify what the issues here are and make decisions on them. So I think it was a very, very close decision. I think you guys should both be really pleased with how well you did. I think I'm always amazed that I'm probably assuming, I hope not unfairly here, that for a lot of us, we're debating in an additional language. And I just find that incredible always. I've spent about 10 months on Duolingo trying to work out how to ask what the time is in German, and I still can't get it. So the fact that you guys can give these incredibly articulate, detailed speeches in another language is a very, very impressive skill. So I hope you think that the OA is fair. I hope you can see where the decision came from. But I think both did a really, really good job. As judges, we'll go into a bit more detail and feedback about how you can improve. But I think just well done all around. That was a really good debate and a really good, I think, demonstration